The phone slammed onto the kitchen counter as the elderly man stared at the ball, his hands shaking, his heart racing, and his bank account already empty. But the voice on the call had promised one thing he still did not know yet. Someone was already on their way to arrest him, and before I tell you who that voice really was, pause for 1 second, tell me in the comments where you are watching from right now, and if you love scam stories that feel like a thriller movie. Subscribe to ScamSphere so you never miss what happens next. Because what unfolded after this call exposed one of the darkest global fraud machines ever built. The call always started politely, almost boringly, with a calm American accent that sounded like it belonged on a government voicemail recording. The caller introduced himself as an Internal Revenue Service officer, badge number ready, case file already open, and the tone immediately carried authority. The victim was informed that there was an unresolved tax discrepancy. It's often linked to a filing error from years earlier. Something vague enough to feel plausible, but serious enough to trigger panic. The scammer would then pause, allowing silence to do the work, letting fear fill the room. Behind that voice was not a federal office or a courthouse. It was a cramped room thousands of miles away, filled with rows of cheap desks, headsets held together by tape, and young men reading scripts taped to their monitors. These call centers operated like factories, running 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, with managers pacing behind agents like drill sergeants. Every call was tracked. Every dollar extracted was logged. Every hesitation from a victim was treated like a weakness to exploit. The threats escalated quickly. Victims were told there was an arrest warrant in their name, that local police had already been notified, and that the only way to stop the process was immediate payment. Not tomorrow, not after consulting a lawyer, immediate. The scammers knew that fear collapses logic. They knew that people do not Google under pressure. They knew that older victims trusted authority voices trained to sound official. The payment instructions were always strange, but fear makes strange things seem reasonable. Victims were told to pay using gift cards, prepaid debit cards, or wire transfers. They were instructed to stay on the phone while driving to the store, forbidden from speaking to clerks, warned that anyone who tried to interfere was part of the investigation. Some victims were on the phone for hours, trapped in a psychological tunnel where the scammer became the only guide. Inside the call center, the atmosphere was darkly absurd. Agents celebrated successful calls with applause. Whiteboards tracked daily totals like a sales competition. Top performers were rewarded with cash bonuses, parties, and promotions. New recruits were trained using recordings of real victims crying, begging, apologizing for crimes they never committed. The lesson was simple. Hesitation costs money. The scripts were refined constantly. If a victim asked for written notice, the scammer mocked them. If they asked why the IRS accepted gift cards, the scammer explained it was part of a new confidential settlement program. If they threatened to call the police, the scammer encouraged it, knowing the victim would stay on the line instead. Every response was rehearsed. Every objection had a counter. One of the most chilling parts was how personal the calls felt. Scammers often had access to partial personal data, names of relatives, addresses, even past employers. This information was used surgically, dropped into conversations to destroy doubt. Victims believed the caller knew too much to be fake. They believed resistance was useless. Money moved fast once it was paid. Gift card codes were read aloud and transferred instantly. Wire transfers were routed through a network of money mules inside the United States. People recruited to move funds quickly before banks could flag them. The money vanished across accounts, currencies, and borders in hours. By the time victims realized the truth, the damage was total. Savings were gone. Retirement funds erased. Some victims lost their homes. Some never recovered emotionally. Shame kept many silent, allowing the operation to grow unchecked. What made this scam terrifying was not just the scale, but the precision. It was industrialized deception, optimized over years, powered by fear. and hidden behind cheap phone lines and fake authority. And while victims suffered alone in kitchens and living rooms, the machine kept dialing, hunting the next voice to break. And that machine was about to make a mistake. The first mistake of the scammers was arrogance. They believed fear was invincible, that no law enforcement across oceans could catch them. And that the thousands of calls made every day could never leave a trace. From the outside, it looked like a simple operation: a phone, a script, and gullible targets. From the inside, it was a chaotic symphony of deception, where every agent, every supervisor, and every manager played a role, rehearsed to perfection, with the occasional laughter breaking through as someone delivered the perfect line and a victim fell for it. Hook, line, and sinker. They did not realize that arrogance makes the smallest flaws expand into wide cracks. And law enforcement loves cracks. Investigators first noticed a pattern not through heroics, but because of sheer numbers. Complaints flooded the FTC, the IRS, and local police departments. Victims reported the same voices, the same threats, the same insistence on paying immediately using gift cards or wire transfers. Some victims were elderly, trembling as they described handing over money to strangers who claimed to have the power of the federal government at their fingertips. Some were middle-aged professionals who never imagined that fear alone could make them do something so irrational. Each report on its own seemed like an anomaly, but thousands together began to tell a story too big to ignore. Undercover agents entered the scene. They pretended to be victims. They stayed on the phone for hours, following the precise instructions the scammers demanded. They wrote down every badge number, every case ID, every subtle intimidation tactic. They memorized scripts that sounded mundane at first. "We are contacting you regarding an unresolved tax discrepancy," but quickly turned sinister as the conversation escalated. Layered with threats of jail, arrest, deportation, and financial ruin. Every pause was a weapon, every sigh a psychological hammer. These calls were engineered to crush the mind of the target, and the agents could feel it, almost physically, as if the fear was transmitted through the phone itself. Meanwhile, in Mumbai, Delhi, and smaller cities, the call centers hummed with life and chaos. Desks were crammed together, headsets tangled, monitors glowing with spreadsheets and victim lists. Managers paced like generals, shouting over the chatter, rewarding the most efficient agents with bonuses or pizza. Agents shared stories of victims crying on the line, sometimes begging, sometimes pleading, always afraid. There was a dark humor to it, a morbid entertainment, because in their eyes, these were games, competitions, contests of wit and endurance. One agent even jokingly created a leaderboard of the longest sob story that had lasted over 45 minutes, applauding their own manipulative artistry. The money, of course, moved faster than any human could follow without a trail. Gift card codes were read aloud into the phone and instantly transmitted to accounts, often converted into reloadable prepaid cards or laundered through multiple runners across the United States. Each transaction was meticulously documented in their systems, not for security or ethics, but for efficiency and accountability. Every cent accounted for, every error noted, every loophole optimized. Law enforcement analysts would later trace hundreds of these paths, mapping the underground financial networks that funneled millions overseas. One of the most chilling aspects was the level of detail the scammers had about victims. Names, addresses, partial social security numbers, family members' names, all were used strategically to disarm any suspicion. If a victim hesitated, the caller could drop a fact so precise that it shattered any remaining doubt. They were not guessing. They were prepared. They had done the research. Every hesitation was an opportunity to escalate, and they escalated with precision. However, even the most sophisticated machine can fail under its own weight. The operation expanded too fast. New agents were hired faster than they could be trained. Scripts were copied and altered without review, producing inconsistencies noticeable to attentive targets or investigators. The laundering network began to leave traces, a transfer here, an unverified prepaid card there, and the U.S. authorities began to see the pattern more clearly. When law enforcement moved in, it was both methodical and dramatic. Raids were conducted quietly, but with the precision of military operations. Buildings once alive with ringing phones and laughter were emptied. Computers seized, scripts confiscated, and records analyzed. Agents froze in shock as their world collapsed, realizing that their carefully constructed empire of fear had left them vulnerable. Managers who had celebrated top performers now found themselves in handcuffs, the humor and bravado of the office replaced by panic and disbelief. The prosecutions that followed were intricate and lengthy. Courtrooms filled with testimony from victims describing the emotional toll, the panic, the terror, the immediate obedience to demands. Prosecutors presented recordings of the calls, badge numbers, and evidence of the laundering networks. Judges and juries heard stories that sounded almost unreal. Elderly women handing over gift cards worth thousands of dollars while trembling on the kitchen floor. Middle-aged men wiring savings to prevent imaginary jail sentences, families frozen in fear because the caller knew the names of their children. Defendants tried various defenses, claiming they were only employees following instructions, claiming ignorance of the ultimate fraud. But the scale, the consistency, the detailed logs, and the testimonies from victims and mules painted a different picture. This was industrialized deception. This was criminal architecture, designed to manipulate, frighten, and extract. Each agent was a cog in a machine, each manager a supervisor of terror. Even after convictions, the shadow of the scam lingered. Smaller cells emerged, mimicking the scripts, modifying accents. Using new phone numbers and continuing to exploit fear, victims remained cautious but vulnerable. The psychological impact of such scams is difficult to measure. Shame silences many. Those who reported late often wished they had spoken sooner, realizing that isolation allowed the machine to grow unchecked. What investigators realized is that these scams were more than just crimes. They were lessons in human psychology. They exploited authority, fear, and the limitations of human reasoning under pressure. They were meticulously researched, constantly refined, and terrifyingly efficient. And yet, for every story of loss, there was also a story of intervention. An alert neighbor, skeptical bank clerk, an informed relative could disrupt the chain and prevent millions more from being stolen. The absurdity and dark humor of the call centers also provided a strange perspective. While victims cried, agents joked. While money disappeared into untraceable channels, supervisors competed for bonuses. There was an almost cartoonish quality to the scale and audacity, a sense that the operation was so enormous that it became surreal, like watching a crime movie unfold in real time, only with real victims and real consequences. And yet, the narrative is incomplete without acknowledging the human cost. Victims were not just statistics. They were grandparents, parents, children of everyday Americans who trusted the authority of their government. Lives were disrupted, relationships strained, health declined from stress and fear, retirement plans vanished. Emotional trauma lingered long after the money was gone. Some victims became advocates. They reported calls, testified in court, and helped law enforcement understand the mechanics of these scams. They turned fear into action, shame into empowerment. And slowly, the machine's power diminished. Not because it was dismantled completely, but because knowledge traveled faster than fear when people understood the patterns. By the end, the story of these call centers is a mixture of horror, absurdity, and human resilience. The scammers had built an empire of deception, but even empires fall when scrutiny is sharp. Patience is applied, and determination refuses to yield. The lessons are clear. Trust but verify. Be wary of pressure tactics. And recognize that fear is the greatest weapon of con artists. And for you, the viewer, if you think this scam was thrilling, horrifying, and almost unbelievable, wait until you hear about the next one. The world of scams stretches far beyond IRS impersonation calls, reaching into deeper, darker, more audacious schemes that defy imagination. Subscribe to ScamSphere to ensure you do not miss the next story, because the next journey is not just a lesson, it is a plunge into deception, audacity, and the psychology of fear, where reality is far stranger than fiction, and the consequences are heartbreakingly real.